All right, so we need to talk about, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about price, and then on Thursday we'll talk about retailing, wholesaling, and then a week from today we will talk about IMC, advertising and promotion, and then a week from Thursday will be the fourth regular exam, and then we'll have the final during the final exam schedule. So price is of the 4 Ps. It is where all of them come together because it represents what you are willing to give up in exchange for those things that you want. And you don't necessarily have to think about it in terms of money, and in fact, in a lot of business transactions over the world, we actually engage in barter. So for example, in Kenya, I believe their currency is called the Kenya shilling. And what is it worth? Well, what is the US dollar worth, and what backs up the US dollar? Say faith? It used to be gold. When did we go off the gold standard? Anybody know when we went off the gold standard? Yes.
Nixon.
What?
I think it was during the Nixon presidency.
You're right. I'll give you 5 points for that. It was during the Nixon presidency, and it was the year of my birth, 1973, is when we fully floated the dollar. Actually, you couldn't go and actually get specie before that if you were a regular consumer, but business transactions and international transactions were on the gold standard. Nixon fully floated the dollar, so what is the dollar worth? Well, it's worth whatever anybody is willing to pay for it. And it floats on a world market, right? And there are people that actually engage in a business called currency trade, the most famous of which is a guy named George Soros, who's a big-time currency trader. He's a billionaire. And he effectively managed to bankrupt the Mexican economy in about one day in something called the tequila effect. Mexico pegged their currency to the US dollar. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. And in a move, he pulled all of his money out of the Mexican currency, the peso, and it totally led other investors to start pulling out, and the peso fell. And so they float. Nobody wants the Kenyan shilling, as far as I know, if you're engaged in lots of international trade. But there may be things in Kenya that we do want, natural resources and things like that. And so we actually engage in barter for a lot of those because nobody wants the Kenyan shilling. And maybe they don't have enough of hard currency to pay for the things that they want in exchange for the things that they're willing to sell. And so barter accounts for billions of dollars in both domestic and international trade. Price can also be what you're willing to sacrifice in terms of your time. So if you think about it with regard to your friendship, like everything involves what economists call an opportunity cost. If you go out with your friend Joe, you can't go out with your friend Megan necessarily, right? So you're giving up something. It's what you're willing to sacrifice. So it's where all of the P's come together. So it may be the most critical of the 4 P's because it represents all of the other parts of the product, price, place, and promotion. And it's where it all comes together. And yet, in spite of this, the fact that it's where it all comes together, there is no unifying theory with regard to how you should set the price. You would think that as important as it is, we would have developed a unifying theory, but there is no unifying theory. When we get to promotion next Tuesday and advertising, there is a unifying theory for that. There are theories about how you should bring products to market, and lots of products don't fail because people don't engage in the sort of market research and testing that we recommend that you do. And even if you do that, you may still fail, as is evidenced by Coca-Cola and the introduction of UCO, but there's at least an idea of how you should go about doing this, right? So there are these sort of unifying theories with how you should bring a product to market, with how you should engage in the promotion. There are lots of theories and logistics about how you get the product to market in the most efficient way, and lots of companies have developed very sophisticated methodologies and just-in-time inventory control. So there are sort of unifying theories in those others, but with regard to price, there is no unifying theory. A lot of it will depend on the goals of the organization itself. So price is it's an enormously important one, and there's no correct period. Of course, the price has to be right. You have to have the right price. So if you are, for example, if your friend Joe asks you to go do something with him, and you're having to give up spending time with Megan, you've got to be able to want more the time that you're going to spend with Joe than you would with Megan. Likewise, if you are going to give up money for these devices that you all carry around in your hand, these iPhones, how many of you have iPhones in here? All right. Why did what are you willing to sacrifice to get this iPhone? How much money are you willing to give up to get that iPhone? The price equation. Price equals the list price minus incentives and allowances plus any extra fees. And so I think the best way to think about this, again, as you're studying for exams and you want to know how to do well on the exams, apply it to something that you all have done and that you know, and you can own it and make it yourself. So decoding the price equation can be very difficult. And this is the one exam you may use a calculator, you may not use your phone because there will be, usually on the pricing chapters, I usually have a couple of problems that ask you to either decode pricing or discounts or things like that, final sales price. So think about something that you all have bought. How many of you have bought a car in here? Almost everybody's bought a car, haven't you? Or your parents bought a car. So you look at the price of the car, the sticker price, and that's called the what? What's the sticker price on the car? Okay, so there's the manufacturer's suggested retail price, but then as you go through it, there's all of these things that are added on. There's a commercial right now with the wavy blow-up kind of guy, and it's on a car lot, and the people on the car lot are saying, is this the same car we talked about? I don't feel comfortable signing this. What's this dealer preparation fee? What is the dealer preparation fee, by the way? So you'll see that in this sticker price. So you've got the MSRP, which is this first number that you're going to get, and then they're going to have things like transportation, shipping, extras that you add on. So for example, if you've got running boards on your truck, that may be an add-on in the price. So they start with the manufacturer's suggested retail price, and then they add all of this stuff on, right? Like the transportation, the running boards, the window tints, the upgraded package for the electronics, whatever it is, the backup camera, things like that. And then you get what? So for example, let's say you bought a lot of Fords in the past. You might get a discount for being a loyal Ford customer, right? So you're going to get the discount. So you have to add all of this up and take out all of those incentives and allowances and then any extra fees that are attached onto it. So it can be very difficult to decipher, particularly with things like automobile prices. Airline tickets can be difficult to decipher. Most people say that they perceive value with higher quality or higher prices. So 84% of U.S. consumers equate higher price with higher quality. And value is the perceived benefits divided by the price that you pay. So decoding the price. Consumers often fail to do the math. For example, let's take Macy's. Macy's has got a constant sale on everything. And you see a jacket at Macy's that you want, and the jacket, and their white sale is everything is 25% off, plus an additional 25% at the register. And so what a lot of consumers will do is they'll say, well, I'm getting it for 50% off, and that's not right, is it? So what do you have? So let's say your jacket is $100. So you're getting 25% off, so minus 25, that's $75, right? And then you're going to take what? An additional 25% off of that, and so if I did my math correctly, it's $56.65 is what you should, I think. Make sure I do my math correctly on that. So you're taking 25%, $56.25 off of the 75, so it's not quite 50% off, is it? But lots of people do, they get lazy in doing the math, and they don't decode the price. It can also be difficult when you think about, for example, buying airline tickets. So you get on Priceline, and you see the price of the tickets, and then they have special fees like what? You get to the airport, and if you fly American or Delta or United or any of the others besides Southwest, what happens to the price? You have to pay for baggage. So there's extra fees. And so it could be, even after you've bought the ticket, if you don't take into account those kinds of things, you can be surprised by the end price that you're actually paying. And consumers oftentimes fail to do this. They get lazy. So price affects revenues and costs. So the profit equation, and there may be a question on there that asks you to calculate the profit equation, is the total revenue minus the total costs, or the unit price times the quantity minus fixed costs plus variable costs. And this is important because obviously the more you produce, what? The more costs you have. And you have to be able to figure out at which point it becomes more profitable or less profitable to do what? To engage in that extra production of a single unit. And so that becomes really, really important. Obviously, businesses, they want to stay in business if they are a for-profit, have to do what? They have to at least break even. They have to cover all of their costs. But most businesses don't want to just do what? Break even. They want to make a profit. So pricing objectives. And a lot of businesses are actually, American businesses are actually accused of engaging in short-term goals. And that's one of the reasons that pricing is somewhat controversial, because a lot of times what we see is that we forego long-term profitability to meet short-term goals. So what are the ways that we can price? We can price for profit. That may mean, and in Japan, one of the things that I was going to show you, but we didn't have time this semester because of the NACURE conference, was a short video on KFC in Japan, when we talk about culture and the importance. And when you go to the banks in Japan, if you say, we're not going to make a profit on this for 15 quarters, the banks there are much more willing to take a risk on businesses because they view it in terms of a long-term strategy as opposed to just a short-term strategy. What is a short-term strategy? It's ROI. And many businesses, particularly small and mid-sized businesses, price for ROI. Why is that? Why is it that they focus on return on investment and having to price for ROI or short-term? Also, quarter-over-quarter sales can be short-term. Lots of companies that are engaged in publicly traded stock will use quarter-over-quarter because they have to file something with the SEC every quarter called a 10Q, and at the end of the year they have to file a what? A 10K. And so that gives investors a window into their profitability, and so a lot of companies start focusing on quarter-over-quarter and year goals, and maybe not necessarily focusing on the long term. Why do lots of small businesses focus on ROI? If you have got short-term business loans out there, you're going to have to do what? Let's say you have a floating lien on your inventory as a small business. Lots of small businesses do this. They engage in financing so that they can buy inventory, and those are oftentimes short-term. They usually have higher interest rates associated with them, and so what do they have to do? They have to focus on paying back that investment and trying to make a profit, and so they'll focus on short-term. You can also price for market share. That's the ratio of the firm's revenues to units of those in the industry. And you see this with things like McDonald's. McDonald's has the overwhelming lion's share of the market. When you are the 300-pound gorilla, you have nowhere to go but what? Down. And so what has McDonald's started to do? Well, with regard to one of their most profitable segments, which is the breakfast industry, they've started losing out to other fast food or casual food restaurants like Starbucks, and so they've had to price accordingly. And they've done two things to try and do that, right? to maintain their market share of the breakfast food market, they've done two things. First of all, they've attempted to become more like Starbucks, and so they've gotten rid of the really bad coffee. There's a very famous case out of New Mexico, which involves, and my students always hate this case, it involves a woman who spills coffee on herself, and she sued McDonald's, and she won millions of dollars. And my business students always hate that as an example of strict products liability. And McDonald's was found guilty because what they found out in the course of the trial, and nobody knows this, is that McDonald's had figured out that if you serve really bad coffee, but you serve it really hot, people won't notice. Why is that? If you serve it really, so McDonald's coffee was for a long time something like 20% hotter than the industry average. So if you serve really bad coffee, but you serve it really hot, people will still drink it because what? Yeah, you're not tasting it actually. It's just, you're just sort of burning your taste buds. And, so this woman gets a coffee through the drive-through window. She happened to be in her 60s. She spills it because it's really hot. They failed to put the lid on correctly. And she suffered third-degree burns over part of her body. And so you take the age that you are and the percentage of your body that has got a third-degree burn, you add them together, and that's the likelihood you have of dying from an opportunistic infection. So your odds are not good. So she won a lot of money. Well, McDonald's realized that they're losing out to Starbucks, and so one of the things that they've done is they've now, after they lost that case, but they've also decided to go for market share to try to maintain their market share of the breakfast market. And so what have they done? They've started offering other offerings like Frappuccinos and the McCafe and stuff like that. But they also have a discount, right? They have a discounted menu, and a lot of the stuff on their breakfast menu is actually on the dollar menu. And so you might price for market share. Unit volume. Lots of companies, of course, and this is one of the reasons that we don't have unifying theories, because we have all of these different goals that a company may have. Some companies are just in survival mode. They're just trying to make it from month to month. They're just trying to survive, particularly a lot of small and mid-sized businesses. And then, of course, you have some companies like Tom's who engage in social responsibility, and so they price for that. What is Tom's motto? One for one. And they've actually influenced other companies. Anybody know of another company that's been influenced by Tom's that's doing the one for one? Bombas. Yeah, you get 5 points for that. Bombas is doing a one for one, and they were influenced, if you listen to their whole advertisement, they were influenced by Tom's model of the one for one. So they're engaging in corporate social responsibility. So pricing constraints, and you have to remember, when I first started teaching here 20-something years ago, I was across the hall from an economist named Dr. Caldwell, and I got really, really tired of every semester listening to her explain to students about the supply and demand curve. So obviously one of the things that affects it, and I would hear this every semester, you have to remember that demand is the entire curve. And I would, after the 50th time I would hear it in a semester, I'd want to run over, just get this through your head. Demand is the what? Entire curve. Supply is the entire curve. And so you have to think about differences between movement along the demand curve and a shift in that curve, right? So in this instance, what we have is we have the original demand curve is at point A, and it shifts to the right at point B. That means that at every point along the demand curve, what? At every single point along the demand curve, people are willing to pay more. What would cause a shift in consumer demand from the right to the left? That would cause everybody to be willing to pay more. More quantity is output. That's one of the things, that's an interesting thing because, let's see, Rick Perry said, I want to give you all a lesson in economics. I remember this very clearly after he was, when he was governor of Texas. I want to give you a lesson in economics. He was talking about the oil industry. If you increase supply, prices will rise to meet it. That's generally not been my experience in the oil business. The oil business is one that it floats exactly on the last barrel. Prices in the oil market are dependent on the last barrel of oil produced. And you have one barrel of oil too much, and what happens to the prices? You have a glut and demand and they fall. If you produce one barrel too few, which is what OPEC tries to do, is they try to control the market by having quotas among their members, prices will rise, right? So what would cause an entire shift in the demand curve to the right, which would cause an increase? At every point along the curve, people are now willing to pay more, right? What? A decrease in supply, okay.
Could be something like quality, how Buick rebranded themselves, because I feel like their prices rose because they made it, it's not as your grandpa's car, but a quality car, you know?
Yeah, they've engaged in advertising, which has tried to appeal, and maybe has done that. Maybe they have increased demand for their cars by making it more attractive to young people. If you've seen their advertisements, and we'll look at advertisements next Tuesday, where I'm in the Buick, I don't see a Buick. And it's not your grandmother's Buick, right? So forever and ever, Buick was sort of seen as a stodgy, older person's car, and they're trying to rebrand. And maybe they have successfully done that, and they've increased the demand for Buicks as a result of getting into a new market that they weren't in before. What about if the economy increases and everybody's making more money? Right? If everybody makes more money, you have more money to spend, you may be willing to pay more, right? So you have to be able to distinguish it on the test between movements along the curve, going from one point to another. And of course, what you want to do with supply is you want supply. There's what's called, economists are just fascinated by this, where the supply curve and the demand curve intersect. That's called the equilibrium price. And economists are absolutely fascinated with that, right? The equilibrium price. So pricing constraints. The cost of production and marketing. Over the long term, you obviously have to cover cost. The newness of the product and the product life cycle is going to affect the price. Generally speaking, what does Apple do with regard to the release of a new product? So Apple, as recently, it was this year, wasn't it? They released 3 actually new iPhones. They released the what? The Apple 8, the Apple 8 Plus, the Apple X, the Apple 10. And what are they hoping that will happen? You'll want the newest, the latest, and greatest model of the iPhone, right? Everybody's going to run right out. And for a while, they engaged in a successful cannibalization strategy in which people would do that. They wanted the newer and greater thing. How many of you actually ran right out and bought the 10? Anybody? No? Nobody bought the 10? One person ran right out and bought the 10. So the newness of the product. When Apple was first out, when the iPhone was first released, and I guess that was probably, what, about 12 or 15 years ago, when they released the first iPhone, and then they released the next generation of the iPhone, people actually were, because it was a fairly new product. What made the Apple different? There were other smartphones, and we looked at those before I talked about this, the first actual smartphone that was out there, which was released, I think, something like 25 years ago. We had the first smart cell phone. What made Apple different, and what made people want to buy it? That it was really sort of new and different about it.
The App Store?
The App Store, okay.
Was it the total touchscreen?
It was the total touch screen. What were other smartphones at the time? What was the biggest, probably, smartphone in the market at the time that Apple releases the iPhone?
BlackBerry.
It was the BlackBerry. And what was great about the BlackBerry? Well, it actually had a full keyboard, and if you can type by touch, which I can, you could actually, it was actually much more user-friendly for business platform than the iPhone, because the iPhone releases what? It's all, can you touch type on the iPhone, or do you have to look at it? Really, you can feel where on the screen.
Muscle memory.
You memorize it, okay. Maybe you've gotten better. I don't think that most people can actually do that. Most people actually have to look at the screen to see what they're typing. So Apple releases this thing, and what was great about it and what made this newness attractive to consumers that they wanted to buy it? Well, the BlackBerry, if you were actually using it for things like what? Looking online or email or things like that, you had this screen that was about half the size of the Apple screen. So what made the new Apple touchscreen really attractive to buyers, that they were willing to pay a premium for it? Was the fact that you could actually see what you were doing, you know? Particularly if you've got, as I've gotten older, you know, and I have to have bifocals now, you can actually see the screen, which you couldn't necessarily see with the BlackBerry. So the newness of the product and the product life cycle. Also, whether or not you have a single product versus an entire product line. So the company I work for, we had an entire product, an entire suite of products that we sold that included the learning management system that we developed, and then content based on the needs of the client that we have. So if you're just a single producer, obviously that's going to affect and going to have a constraint on your prices. One of the things that we were able to do was we were able to, the more titles you bought, the more discount we could give a school, because we could bundle the price, and we could afford to do that. Whereas if you're just selling a single product, like there is a company that does nothing but manufactures wire coat hangers for dry cleaning companies, right? For dry cleaning businesses, they've only got a single product. Although maybe they actually have a couple of products. What kind of variations in that product do they have, besides just wire coat hangers? Yeah, the paper that goes on it so that you can pay, you know, that's kind of sticky, that you can hang slacks on. And a lot of times they put on top of the wire coat hanger for coats and things like that, a little plastic piece. So maybe they actually do have 3 products. Very few companies actually sell one. But for the most part, they sell coat hangers. And obviously that's going to be a pricing constraint, because you're going to just have, you know, a limited number of things that you can sell. The cost of prices at the time, and so the cost of changing prices at the time. Also, in the past, it was harder to change prices. So one of the pricing constraints that you might have was every year, for years and years and years, Sears and Roebuck used to release what was called the Wish book. And it came out around Christmas time, and people actually waited for this book. Well, if the cost of their production went up, or if the cost of shipping went up, they had already printed the prices, and this was before the internet, and they'd sent out all of these books, and so you couldn't really change it until you sent out the next set of catalogs, and so that could be a pricing constraint. That's less so true in things like the world of the internet, where we can order online. And also the types of competitive markets. For most things, for example, in things like gasoline prices, how many of you use an app to try and find the cheapest gas? A lot of you does. When gas was about, I used to ask this question, when gas was reaching or approaching $4 a gallon in the Oklahoma City area, and almost everybody raised their hand. They were all using Gas Buddy or something like that to find where was the cheapest gas. But for the most part, what happens with gas prices in the Oklahoma City area? Are there radical differences in gas prices? No, because what? Convenience stores know that if they set their price and try to mark up the margin too high, you'll go across the street. If 7-Eleven charges too much, you'll go to OnQ or something like that. You'll find it. Interestingly enough, when my brother was going to school in Stillwater at OSU, and I was at OU, the prices in Stillwater of gasoline were always about 20% higher than the rest of the state, because at that point in time there were 2 guys in Stillwater who owned all of the gas stations. And they met once a week for breakfast at a restaurant in Stillwater, and remarkably, the prices in Stillwater were always about 20% higher. That's actually called price fixing, and it's against the law if you can prove it. But it's difficult to prove. It's difficult to prove, collusion. It just was a happy coincidence, I guess, that the prices were significantly higher. Well, that's because there's a lack of competition in that specific market. But in most places like Oklahoma City, how big is the competitive market? You've got Sam's, you've got Murphy gas stations at Walmart, you've got OnQ. What don't we have that they have in Tulsa? We have OnQ, they have, Quick Trip they have in Tulsa, which we don't have. You have Love's, you've got, all of these competing in competitive markets. Whereas, if you're in the airline industry, how many airlines are there out there? Like a handful of airlines, right? They have an oligopoly in that kind of market. So fundamentals of estimating revenue. Total revenue is price times quantity, and obviously your quantity affects your total revenue and your price. Average revenue is your total revenue divided by quantity, and there might be questions that ask you to calculate these things. Why would you need average revenue? Well, for example, as I suggested to you with regard to AEC, we bundled a lot of our packages, and so what we sold to one school a price at, we might not sell to another for the same title, and so you'd want to know what your average revenue is on that title. The marginal revenue is the change that results from producing one additional unit of the product, and this becomes important in figuring out whether or not it's profitable for you to produce that one extra unit. At some point, if you're manufacturing something and you get beyond the capacity of your plant, you're going to have to do what in order to produce that one extra unit? What do you have to do? You have to add production capacity, which means you may have to do what? Build new facilities, engage in capital construction. Price elasticity, a percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So if you have elastic, it increases in the price result in a large decrease in demand. If you have inelastic, a 1% increase in the price produces less than a 1% increase in demand. And if you have unitary, you have a 1-for-1 exact ratio of increase to decrease. Now, your textbook actually argues that things like gas are inelastic. Is that true? Is gasoline inelastic? This is one place where I really disagree with the textbook, at least in maybe one of the older editions. I don't know if the new edition actually still says this. But they argued, the textbook authors argued, that gas prices were inelastic. Is that true? What happens when gas reaches $4? Actually, there's a lot of studies on this. The number of highway fatalities decreases for every 30 cents over $2 a gallon. The percentage of highway fatalities decreases exponentially. Not just algebraically, it decreases exponentially. Why is that? What happens for every 30 cents over $2 a gallon that would increase or decrease the supply and demand for gas?
More people can't afford it.
More people, okay, so you may have fewer people driving. What else, when gas reaches about $4 a gallon, what happens?
You're not traveling as far.
People, you don't go on the road trip during the summer that you might have planned. What else that affects the fatalities? What happens when gas prices reach or fall below $2? How many of you have a lead foot? How many of you are willing to gun it to get on the interstate fast when gas prices get to about $4 a gallon, and you do what? You slow down. You accelerate far less. Your acceleration is much more steady, whereas if you have gas prices about $2 a gallon, people are willing to slam on that accelerator and get up on the interstate. They're also willing to drive much faster on the interstate, and that creates a lot of variance in the driving, and so the one thing that increases accidents, particularly on highways, is the variance in speed. And so it's one of the things that as gas prices rise, we see a decrease because there's less variance on the highway. People are accelerating more smoothly, they're driving slower so that their cars are more efficient and they use less gas. What else happens in times of gas prices being about $4 a gallon? One of the things that I noticed when gas prices were about $4 a gallon in Oklahoma City was that I have a boat. And what are gas prices on the lake? If the gas prices are $4 a gallon in the city, the gas prices on the lake were about $8 a gallon. Lots of people have boats that you can't pull out of the water and take to the gas station. So what happened that summer that gas prices were about $4 a gallon? There was a whole lot more boats sitting at the marina rather than actually out on the lake. And so there is a huge, I think, decrease in demand when you get to a percentage, or when you get to a point that gas prices reach about $4. So arriving at the final price, there are demand-oriented pricing. So Apple generally uses what we call, and I could read this example before, a skimming. And they particularly used this when they were really an innovative company. As Apple released anything, for a long time under Steve Jobs, they were releasing really new and innovative things really pretty quickly. Have they really released anything that is really all that innovative? So Apple was one of the first ones with regard to those things that you all have on your desk. What made an Apple laptop different from a Windows book? What was one of the big innovations that they came up with for that device right there?
I mean, the unique thing is like the way they set up like the keyboards and stuff. Like when you scroll it scrolls like opposite.
Okay,
So
it scrolls opposite of the Windows, which drives me crazy. Okay.
Can your phone hook up with like other laptops? Like you can link your phone perfectly with like your MacBook, and you can do all of the stuff you can do on your phone on here. Just
Okay.
other computers.
And message to get messages from the phone.
Right, and you can receive calls, can't you, on the laptop as well. One of the things that I think Apple was, I may be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure that they were the first one to have a static drive in their laptops, which made them what? What's one of the things that makes the static drive a lot better? And so what is the storage device on most computers? It's a disk drive, right? Which means it has to do what? It spins up, right? So you've got this thing that spins up, and it writes on that spinning thing. What does that spinning do to it?
It wears over time.
It wears over time. What else happens? What? It generates a lot of heat, right? This movement, friction generates heat, and so other laptops that don't have static drives have to do what? Now you have to add something else to them. You know, you have to add a fan that takes up space. So what made the Apple really unique with regard to its static drive? They're compact, they were a lot lighter. You could get a lot lighter, that's really an innovation. The iPhone was really pretty unique compared to other devices at the time. I'm not sure that Apple is all that big of an innovator anymore. I think in many respects what they've done is they've engaged in incremental technological advances. They were one of the first ones to release a really popular, they did not release the first digital music player, but they certainly perfected it, the iPod. Does anybody actually still use iPods? Why would you use an iPod? Because you've got it what?
Yeah,
On your phone. You've got it on your phone now. So that was one of the things that was innovative. So Apple used a skimming strategy. They released their iPhone, and I remember I have friends who are huge Apple fans, and they were like the first ones that I knew. They're what we call early adopters of technology. They were one of the first ones to run right out and buy. They were on the waiting list, and they were the first ones to get the new iPhone when it first came out 15 years ago, or whenever it was. And I said to them at the time, it'll drop, that price will fall in about 3 months, 3 to 6 months, and is it really going to be worth it? And they insisted that it was just so worth it to have the iPhone, to pay the premium price that they were charged. So skimming is used by innovators. The opposite of skimming is the penetration pricing strategy. In consumer packaged goods, you find a lot of people that will set an initial low price to try and get people to try their products. This is particularly true with things like food, cereals. When Mary Boothman started, and she's a graduate of UCO, she started a restaurant called Maria Ray's in Enid, and then they began canning their salsa and making chips and things like that and getting it into the market. She had to go in and she had to set a low price to try and get into Walmart and agree to go out and give out samples to get people to buy it and try it, because how many different types of chips are there out there? There are lots. And how many different types of salsa products are there in that market? There are a lot, and you're facing a steep competition with companies that have been there and been far more established for a long period of time. So prestige pricing, generally speaking, the demand curve is what we call a negative or inverse curve, right? So you have price over here, quantity over here, and the higher the price, the less quantity is going to be demanded. But in some instances, you actually see a positive relationship. Tag Heuer, and I wore my tag today. I've been wearing it actually for about 2 weeks now. Tag Heuer, and I love watches. So Tag Heuer's average watch price 10 years ago was about $500 a watch. That was their average across their product line. They increased that to $1,000, and demand actually went up. Why is that? What is a Rolex? What is the base model, the Air King Rolex start at? What's the price of a base model Air King Rolex? $7,000. $7,000 for a brand new Rolex. Rolex increases their prices year over year by 10%. At $500, Tag Heuer wasn't seen as a luxury watch. At $1,000, they become more like what? They become more like Rolex. And demand actually increased when they raised their prices. So prestige pricing. Rolex doesn't want to sell a watch to everybody, do they? No, they don't. Rolex does not want to sell a watch to everybody. Price lining, this assumes that demand is inelastic between price points. And so you'll see things like prices of slacks in a department store, priced at $59, $69, and $79 dollars. So you're assuming that it's inelastic between those points, but elastic around the point. Odd even pricing, this actually works, but it will, if you use it too much, if you use the odd even pricing too much, people get used to it, they don't pay as much attention to it. What does odd even pricing assume? Well, it assumes that in the psychology of the consumer that they perceive it as less than. So $59.99 is perceived as being what? Less than 60. Right? Targeting prices, this is estimating what consumers will pay and then backing into the price, figuring out what the price that they're willing to pay, the demand that you need to make money, and then backing into the price that way. Bundle pricing is used on things like, obviously, Cox. Home, how many of you still have a home phone because it was cheaper if you bundled the package and you don't use it? I mean, you may not even hooked it up, but it's cheaper if you bundled home, internet, or home phone, cable, and internet all together. Yield management systems estimate the price based on very complex models that estimate the demand. So things like the airlines. Generally speaking, as a result, and the airlines use a proprietary system to determine does it cost the airline anything more to fly at 5 o'clock in the evening as it does at 5 o'clock in the morning? Really? No. Why are there radically different prices between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. and in between? Yeah, They don't. So, you know, they're generally, it used to be that you could generally get cheaper flights on the red eye. That's actually become, which was either the really late or the really early flights, that's actually become less common as a result of business travel, because most business people want to do what? Particularly if they want to get home the same day. They're willing to go really early. You can also get cheaper prices if you're willing to fly on a day other than when's the busiest days. If you're willing to fly for business travel, and that's what they price a lot of their models towards, their yield management systems. So when do business travelers generally travel? Monday to Friday, right? So if you're willing to go, if you're willing to come back on a day other than Monday, or depart on, for example, a Tuesday, usually, that you can get better prices. Cost-oriented. So in the supermarkets, what's the cost pricing of the supermarket? It's standard markup pricing. What is it, the profit margin over the average of a supermarket? What's their profit margin on most of their stuff? It's about 3%. So standard markup. Lots of department stores use the standard markup. So you buy a product for $25 and the standard markup is 100%, $50. Cost plus pricing. You see this a lot with things like homes, building, and construction, because what happens? As you're building a home, what may happen? What could happen, for example, to the timber market? You could have a natural disaster and prices go up, and so your contractor uses, in many instances, a cost plus. So I'm going to build the house for what it costs plus, 10% to cover my profit. Profit-oriented, where you target profit, a target return on investment, a target return on sale. You can have competition-oriented, which is where you have things like customary pricing. What does it cost to buy a Coke out of the vending machines here? A 20-ounce bottle? It's $1.50. Why is that? It's between $1.50 and $2. That's pretty customary in almost every place that you go, except hotels, which think that they've got a captive audience and they obviously charge more. But it's generally like at places like UCO and the vending machines, you have sort of the customary. At, above, or below pricing, and then you have loss leader. What's a loss leader? Well, that's where you price something below in order to try and get people to come in and then buy other things in the store. Walmart used to do this. They used to send people out to comp shop, and it used to be that if you the fastest way to get thrown out of a store was to go around and start with a notebook. When I was growing up, Walmart would send people out to go comp shop at Target and other places, and then they would beat or match the prices of their competitors. The easiest way to get thrown out was to start comp shopping. Now, stores realize that they can't really stop them from doing that because what? Everybody has a cell phone, and you just do what? Just go through the store and start taking pictures of the prices, and who knows, right? You're not necessarily doing it. So Walmart would do that. They would price something below or loss leader in order to get people to come to Walmart and their everyday low prices. Any questions about price? All right, so on Thursday we will talk about retailing and wholesaling. Is that what I said? Okay. And then advertising and IMC a week from today, and then the fourth exam a week from Thursday.